Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are very, very happy to have Michael Eble here with us tonight. Michael was born in New Orleans, earned a BFA in painting from the University of Louisiana at Lafayette, and an MFA in painting. I'm going to say it the way that it's my alma mater, Ole Miss, in Oxford, Mississippi, the University of Mississippi. Michael currently serves as the Assistant Dean for the UL College of the Arts and the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. In his role, he oversees communications, events, and exhibitions for the college while nurturing the next generation of creative minds. In 2016, Michael returned to Louisiana after spending 13 years in Minnesota, where he was an associate professor of studio art and the curator of the Edward J. and Helen Jean Morrison Gallery at the University of Minnesota-Morris. Michael has been awarded several grants and fellowships, including an ArtSpark grant, Louisiana Project grant, and an advanced faculty grant from UL Lafayette. He has also received multiple Imagine Fund awards and Grant and Aid awards from the University of Minnesota, a residential fellowship in 2008 from the Institute for Advanced Study, and additional grants and research funding from the McKnight Foundation, Lake Region Arts Council, Vermont Studio Center, Science Museum of Minnesota, and the New York Mills Regional Cultural Center. Michael's artwork explores abstracted topographies, promoting viewers to reflect on their own connections within their environments. His paintings and works on paper have been exhibited in numerous regional and national solo and group exhibitions, with recent shows in Louisiana, Minnesota, North Dakota, and Wisconsin. He is currently represented by Cole Pratt Gallery in New Orleans, and I am very pleased to present my friend, Michael Eble.
Thanks for everybody that came out tonight. I know there's a lot going on, but I have a lot to share with y'all. Often people, especially over the last couple of weeks when I've done a couple of interviews, they'll ask, why did I call the exhibition Somewhere? And they're looking for something to grab onto to understand what I'm doing. And certainly by the end of the evening, you'll have a better understanding. But I like the term somewhere because it's ambiguous, that there's a lot of different meanings to the word, negative, but also positive. And then I was looking at the term ambiguous today, and it says, open to one's own interpretation. And I think that hits the nail on the head, that I want my work, I want you to bring something to it and take something away from it also. But I don't have a set idea that you need to walk away with this one idea. So somewhere, that you're searching for somewhere, but then also in a positive light, you're getting somewhere. And I thought a lot about that in my office, but also in the studio. So I'm going to kind of take you a little road back in time. I don't have the most easy flowing timeline, but I'm going to go back in time and then bring us forward all the way to 2024. But it won't be tiring, it'll be entertaining. So this is just this is an image here from a residency I did in 2010, and it's called Pine Needles. It's an artist residency program sponsored by the Science Museum of Minnesota, and it's in a small town called Marine St. Croix, or Marine of St. Croix. And it's set on the St. Croix River, which borders Wisconsin and Minnesota. And St. Croix River is also a tributary to the Mississippi. So it's up here, it starts, and then the Mississippi, and when you hit St. Paul, it joins the Mississippi. And so they give you this beautiful cabin, 3 weeks, you're 30 feet up on the bluff, overlooking the river. You can kind of hear everything that happens on the river. There's no cell phone service. You have a landline. You do have some internet. I bet it's gotten better over time. But during this time, they wanted me to collaborate with the scientists that are at the research station, which is down the road from the cabin. And so I'd take this trail and I'd go do wash my clothes, and I'd talk with the scientist. And one time, they invited me to go out on an excursion on the Mississippi River. So they took the boat down the St. Croix to the Mississippi. And what they were doing was they were coring samples of the bottom of the Mississippi River, and they were studying the history of the river. To also give you some, understanding that the Mississippi River starts in Minnesota at Itasca State Park. And so this is kind of my family here years ago at the start of the Mississippi River, and they have a marker. And if some of y'all saw Philip Gould's exhibit here a couple years ago about the history of the Mississippi, I had a long talk. I was like, you need to start in Itasca, and he included several images from kids kind of playing and dipping their toes in the Mississippi. So this coring mission, maybe kind of think about the landscape or my natural habitat from a different perspective. And so these are just images of the Mississippi River and how it's changed over time. This is one soil sample, but the coring samples they were taking from the river off that rig were about this big. And they would freeze them, and they would slice them and analyze them and study the history of the land. And it was just, for me as an artist, it was a different way of looking at the landscape. And so this is a striation. This is totally somewhere else in the West Coast. But it's thinking about place in the landscape in a different format of striations. And so this is kind of 2010. And I kind of carried this idea with me for a number of years. This was some of the work I produced during the residency. And it was for the first time I really was dipping my toes in true kind of abstraction, using a lot of pattern making, just a total departure from the previous work that was much more landscape oriented, much more from an aerial viewpoint. People that have known my work for 20 plus years can kind of connect with that. And then in the end, these were two finished pieces, and I kind of threw these in here because these were the first pieces I ever showed at the Killiard in 2012. And it was for an exhibit called Morgan as Mentor. It was in honor of the late Elmore Morgan. And I don't really even remember, I didn't look up the titles of the pieces. I never saw the show because I lived in Minnesota at this point, but I just wanted to include that. I'm going to speed things up to 2014 and 2015, and I was looking at my resume, and these years were really robust years for my career. Things really just kind of took off, and I counted this. I'm going to kind of brag a little bit. I'm usually pretty humble, but in this span of 2 years, I had 5 solo exhibitions, 7 group exhibitions, and 4 juried exhibitions. And it was a real, like I said, a turning point. So it's about 10 years ago. And I'd already had tenure at this point, but things were just really happening for me in Minnesota. And then I also had opportunities in Louisiana to show. And one of the more, I was thinking about this exhibit here. This was at the Minnetonka Center for the Arts. This is like a really posh art center on the outskirts of Minneapolis. And they had a biennial that they would have twice a year. And one thing about the biennial was that it's not just one piece. They would select maybe 5 to 8 artists, and they would ask you to submit, 5 to 8 pieces. And it was in this exhibit that I was checking out, I was looking at the sign-in book. And, not a lot of places do sign-in books anymore. They, and they allow people to put comments. And someone wrote, I don't know much about art. I don't know who Michael Eble is, and I don't know his work. But I do know that I like the work, and it makes me happy. And I thought that was and I wish I had the snapshot. I took a picture of it, but in a way to bring joy in that simplicity of your work, it really took to me. And one of the main pieces I produced that got into this biennial was this piece called Morning Breakthrough. So the little sample, what you saw on that table and where I've gone, I started a whole series called Striations. And so I'm embracing this idea of looking at the land from an abstract linear format that certainly is connected with this work here, This is just 10 years ago, and this was called Morning Breakthrough. I can remember I was at a hockey tournament in Brainerd, Minnesota, which is an actual place. It's not a fictitious place from the movie Fargo. People vacation there, but they also have they have a great hockey scene there. And I was in an indoor water park. And so imagine you're in an indoor water park and you can look out a window and you can see a frozen lake, and then there's water here, and I could watch the sun drop on this frozen lake, but I could see the reflections in the water of the indoor water park. And that's where this idea came, to kind of think about striations in the earth, think about striations in the reflective quality of water, and how also color can also work together. And so this became the antithesis of a whole series of works similar to this work here that we're looking at. And so that's Tom Nye, and that my work in the middle. These are a couple other installation shots. The gallery there is phenomenal. And so, like I said, I had, I think, seven pieces in the show. Also, later that year in Minneapolis, I had a solo show at a gallery called Gallery 13 that represented me in Minneapolis for a number of years. It was in downtown Minneapolis, around the corner from the Target headquarters. This was a faculty show that I put together. It was called Artist, Teacher, Scholar. And I was, you look at these images and I was like, where's that piece? And where's that piece? And I do still have memory. One was bought by the University of Minnesota. Another one was bought by the Ridgeview College that was nearby. And they were both 60 by 60 inches, so they were pretty large pieces. This was a piece, a solo exhibit I had here in Lafayette, downtown at the Kelly Kaufman Gallery. And this is, again, all in 2014. And then I like to show this. This is an exhibit of work I did for a friend of mine. This is called the Traveling Museum. And so what it is, it's an ice house that serves as an art gallery. And we had an opening on Mardi Gras Day. And we had friends come out. And this is a frozen lake. We drove, it's my minivan back here. PBS or Minnesota Public Radio and Television came out and did a whole thing. And then this is just a short video of the inside of the gallery space. And so the work, I'll talk a little bit more about this work, where it's coming from in a second. Some of the work changes and it's a little bit different than the previous striation work. And then I like this here. This is actually the hole you fish out of. And that little orange thing right there is the fishing pole. It has a line running down. And then my friend Andrew Nordine, who's also a painter and curator, he had a camera. And there's cameras that go down and can film and see if there's fish down there. And you can actually record them biting onto the hook. He would often use it to interview artists and hold exhibitions of artist work in the gallery. All right, so that's just kind of a little bit of history of where I was creatively during those years that kind of give a little bit of perspective to where this work started and where it came from. I was telling these young ladies here, I teach art appreciation every so often for the College of the Arts or for the Department of Visual Arts. And one thing that makes teaching that course really great is that I've had the opportunity to travel a lot, especially when I was at the University of Minnesota, and I had an abundance of travel and grant money. And so hand in hand, traveling and the opportunity to see things that are relevant in my field of study and relevant to art and painting has been super important. I don't know if any of y'all made it to the Rodin Symposium, but the last speaker, he was a sculptor and fabricator, I believe. He kind of brought up this exhibit here, and I kind of felt like he kind of stole my thunder because I couldn't wait to talk about it. But right now at the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., they're celebrating Paris 1874, the impressionistic moment. And what they're doing is they're honoring, close to 125 years ago, Impressionism, or actually 150 years ago, Impressionism was born. And it was born out of this exhibit of kind of avant-garde artists known as Impressionists that didn't get into the big salon show in Paris, and so they started their own show. And of course, Monet is part of this exhibit, Cézanne, Marie Borsat, and a number of notable artists. And one of the main pieces that comes historically out of this is Monet's Impressionistic Sunrise. And so there's been a lot of talk about it, especially in the podcasts I listen to, about the importance or not that importance of the painting, but certainly it's front and center in this exhibit. It's also the first time that this painting has ever traveled to the United States. It's always at a museum, Marmottan Monet, on the outskirts of, just on the edges of Paris. And I've had the opportunity to see this. But for me, in my work, it's about the brushstrokes. It's certainly about the birth of Impressionism and abstract painting. But it's the striations of those brushstrokes that, in a way, kind of open up the door to other forms of abstract painting. And just seeing those hatches, and that Monet allows those to exist on their own, is something I've been thinking about, and especially with this current body of work. This is something fun. If you're on Instagram and you follow art but make it sports, this guy takes a piece of artwork every day and juxtaposes it with a sports image, and so I thought this was kind of fun. But going back, thinking about an impressionistic sunrise and kind of looking at water in general, I did some reading over the summer in context with the work, and there's a whole study called Blue Mind that Wallace J. Nichols wrote, and he's a psychologist. He's no longer with us, but this was a big doctoral study, and it's pretty simple. He studied what water did to people when they were around it. He also talked about other negative effects of it, but mostly that when you're around water, you feel better, your life is better, you become recharged. And I always just kind of chuckled at it. I was like, this guy's never been to Louisiana before. I think like if he was in landlocked areas, I get it, but people do that every summer. And so it was just something that kind of informed the work. And then certainly I could spend a lot of time talking about the scientific and the fractal quality of what light does with rippling water. And certainly that feeds into my work too. Again, there's a lot of ambiguous things that feed it. Talking about travel, in I think it was 2010, I had a 1 year, a single semester leave, and I had also wrote a research grant. And I was interested in Impressionism and its relationship to water, specifically the Seine River, or the Seine River. And so it runs from Paris all the way to Normandy, the Normandy coast, where you have Le Havre and Honfleur. You also passes Rouen, Giverny, Vernon. These are all important cities in relation to the history of Impressionism, but also modern art. And so, I rented a car in Paris. I saw everything I wanted to see in Paris. I drove to Giverny, spent the day, stopped at Rouen in the afternoon, and then ended up staying in Honfleur and also spending some time in Le Havre, where Monet grew up. And so this is all kind of just from my past, and this was work I made in between 2010 and 2012. And so I'm working representational, and I'm working from the reflections in the water. But in hindsight, like after, I became much more interested in the abstract quality of what was going on in the water versus what the boats look like or the buoys. And so I had an exhibit in New Orleans. It was summer 2012 at the Mallory Page Gallery. Let's see. Yep. And then 2 years later, I had another research grant to spend the summer in the south of France. And when you think about modern art, and Matisse, Cézanne, Van Gogh, I know I was probably missing someone else in that big three, Picasso, they all lived in this area of France, which is the second most area visited in France. So you have the French Riviera, but you also have the town of Aix-en-Provence. You have Arles, where Van Gogh is, who lives, Marseille, which is also a really interesting city. And so this was kind of two pieces that came out of that. And the left-hand piece, I can't remember the title. I didn't have time to look it up today, but it has something to do with Antibes, where the Picasso Museum is. And it's this beautiful, it's almost like a castle that Picasso lived in and worked in, and it oversees the Riviera, and it's absolutely beautiful. And then if this piece certainly has kind of a reference to Cézanne and Aix-Provence and all the landscapes that he painted during that period. And again, I'm still kind of, I'm adopting that striation of linear form in expressing these areas and these experiences. And so this was showed, again, with Kelly Kaufman in 2014. And that, how work in travel informs you as an artist, but also as a scholar. This is an area down the street from Cézanne's studio. And you can go visit Cézanne's studio, and then you kind of walk up this hill, and there's a hill where they've made reproductions of all of his paintings of Mount St. Victoria. And it's kind of and so you kind of look at each of these reproductions, and then you're able to see the mountain in the distance. And so, this is art history. Is good. You can't get any better to be able to experience these things. So this is kind of when my art appreciation class comes into, and teaching it every semester and yearly, and how it informs my practice. And so, I'm thinking, I get to think about Impressionism a week or so ago, Post-Impressionism, Expressionism, and then I get to Cubism, which is Picasso, Braque, a little bit of Cézanne on the early end, but also the invention of collage. And I think about this from 1872 or 1874 to 1913. You have 30-something, 35, 38 years of art history that's happening in Europe, and it's the creation of modern art. And it allows artists to do what they want and follow their own personal expression. They're not dialed into religion or the Pope or people paying them. They're making work for themselves for the first time. And I always think that's just super empowering when we get to that point. It's not about the Romans, it's not about the Greeks, it's about what the artist wants to make their artwork about. And that's the great beauty of modern art. Additionally, it's also when collage comes into play. And so I collage a lot in these paintings. And there's also, I've been doing a little bit of research. Picasso says he invented collage. So does George Braque. These are two Picasso collages. And also the founding of Cubism. And so you have George Braque here. They worked very hand in hand, and they worked together a lot. But they're the first artists to bring collage into play. And then, of course, there's Matisse. And I didn't kind of mention him. He falls into here under Expressionism and Fauvism. He also lives in the south of France. This is a really important piece called Outdoor Window, and an example of his father's works. And Matisse, over time, has decades. He rivals Picasso through the modern era, and he has a number of different changes in his work. Later in life, he decides to do paper cutouts, and what he likes to interpret is drawing with scissors. And he didn't say the term collage, he used paper cutouts. And so he has this entire series of cutouts, some of them very small and intimate that have to do with jazz, some of them designing garments for his chapel and for priests and nuns. And then I thought I had a bigger image. I took it out of these larger wall pieces. So art history, certainly informs what I'm doing because I'm teaching art appreciation, but then it's also kind of a new discovery every year. In my 20s and 30s, I'm constantly looking at contemporary art and leaning forward of what is happening new in New York. And as I've gotten older and certainly teaching, I've looked back more. And one beauty about art history, it's not changing, it's happened. And so you can kind of bring fresh eyes to it or your own ideas to it. Other things, okay, again, there's lots of things that go into my work versus topography and water reflections. I have a strong interest in mid-century architecture, in particular New Orleans mid-century architecture. I'll talk a lot about the year 1984, and then the sneakers. So looking at my time here. So growing up in New Orleans, I don't think the city and people can put a lot of thought and effort into the cathedral as its main landmark, but for me, it's the Superdome. In the city, from the sky, it's something you can see. You can see it in the distance. You get excited when you see it from an airplane. And then also I have a kind of a kinship. It was built in 1975, the year I was born. And so every year when it celebrates its birthday, it's my birthday. When it turns 50, I will turn 50. And so and I've lived through a lot of different things that have happened there, and I've visited at 7 different viewpoints. And so I really got into the architecture firm Curtis and Davis. And this was a well-known firm in New Orleans. And they were the modern architectural firm that came to be, I think, in 1948. Let me check my notes. 1947. And then they disbanded in 1971. But they designed the Superdome. They completed designing it in 1967, so it took 8 years to finally get it built. And often I tell people, I'm going to kind of go back, everybody sees this bend in the river here and why we call it the Crescent City and all that. I often tell people when I'm walking down Poydras Street, I was like, you see that bend there? That's honoring the Mississippi River. And people never understood, they didn't realize that. They also talked about that gold on the outside, they wanted it to be kind of like this great Greek or Roman temple, and that's why they used the gold on the outside. I also love the ramps, too. That's also very mid-century. Even though it was built in 75, the ideas of modern architecture in New Orleans came from the 50s and 60s. And it's also the idea of the city coming post out of World War II, becoming a really metropolitan major U.S. city with all the port becoming vibrant and being a main gateway for products from South America, and also the oil and gas field that had exploded in the 70s into the 80s. Another main mid-century architecture piece was the Rivergate Center, which was the first conference center, and it was one of the biggest ones when it was built in 1968. And it has this large concrete roof that, again, looking at the language, look at this bend in it, but these other images, you have that flow there, that linear form, and that's a design language that I connect with. One thing about mid-century architecture in New Orleans is it wasn't taken, modern architecture was not embraced. People are traditionalists. They love the Spanish architecture in the French Quarter. They love the neoclassical architecture on St. Charles Avenue. So a lot of these were not well received by the community. And so there's only so many little pieces of it left. This was destroyed or torn down in 1995 to make room for the Harrah's Casino, which is really ugly. And then there's other little buildings, like on Canal Street, the Automotive Life Insurance Building on the right with those arches. The great thing about it is it's now the Mid-City Public Library, and so it'll be there forever. Notice the ramp that also reflects the ramps on the Superdome. And then this is a bus stop in Lakeview. Lakeview has a ton of houses that were built during this period. And so mid-century is still very much alive in New Orleans, but also a lot of other places. So speeding things up, for me, 1984 was this really great year for New Orleans. It was a great year in my childhood. I was 8 to 9 years old in between there. And I constantly, when I see the graphic design and the iconography from this World's Fair, which was also, its theme was worlds of water. And so everything had to do with water. It was also set on the banks of the Mississippi. It was just, I had all these incredible memories from it. And they're celebrating its 40th anniversary. I think there was a number of exhibits in Baton Rouge about it. But for me, it was very much the graphic language that still sticks with me, how they show waves and this linear designs that are prevalent in the Rivergate, prevalent in the Superdome, but also in the logos. And then also think about the artists that I grew up with as a youngster, and that I didn't, maybe growing up, I didn't know who they were, but later in life, I was like, that's Lynn Emery, who had an exhibit here. Ida Kohlmeyer, her work is everywhere, and all these different collections. And then John Scott, that now in New Orleans, they have a whole foundation and museum set up. He taught at Xavier for many years. And the language they use, I see very much connects with the language, the design language of mid-century architecture in New Orleans, but also the graphic language that was very prevalent in the 80s. Another example is this Breakers logo from 1984. The Breakers only played in New Orleans for 1 year in 1984. And so you have some of that same design language that you see in this logo, in this artwork, and then in these uniforms also. So all of this, I'm kind of coming back from Minnesota and living in Louisiana. I'm making these little connections here that I bring into my studio. I know it's like a lot. I'm all over the place. I've been watching Leonardo da Vinci's documentary that Ken Burns did this week. That guy was all over the place too. So it's all right for Michael Eble to be all over the place. This is, I don't know anybody, yeah, none of y'all must probably are around, but there was a tradition called tattoo walls. Stephanie might remember it, or definitely Linda knows it. And this one, I came across, I did this in like 2018, was probably the last summer, 2020, when they did it on the backside of the Hilliard. And it just kind of fit with this interest in design and logos. And so what I did was I took all my favorite sports logos and I cut them up and made compositions. And so I was like, man, this is a whole body of work here. I should riff off of this. And maybe I will one day. And so they were projected on the backside of the Hilliard really large. All right. So my last thing, and I promise I'll get to the work and talk about the actual work a little bit. I started teaching a class in 2017 called Sneakerology. It's a University 100 course for first-year freshmen. I teach all these first year freshman things, how to get advised, where the library is, how to get advised. But then I also blend in this history of sneakers. And it's one of those classes I've been teaching for 7 years, and I keep saying it's my last time I'm ever going to teach it because the kids are getting younger and I'm getting so much older. But there's also at one point, somebody grabs me on campus and they tell me how much they love the class. And last week, I had a student contact me, and he named me his favorite teacher. Out of all 3 years I've been his favorite teacher because of this course. So now I must probably teach it again. But anyway, I'm going to show, this is a picture from my childhood. This is like I had to be my eight-year birthday, I'm thinking. And this is my sister right here. And she's wearing these same sneakers that are going for $400 today on eBay. But one thing I decided to do was I'm going to show you artists I appreciate and look at, and I curated shoes for each of these artists. And so I could have done a whole lecture on this because it was so much fun. But so this, of course, is Rothko, and these are a pair of Nike running shoes. They're called LD 100s, but they're also called Daybreaks, which I think is really kind of connects with this Rothko painting. And then this is Ellsworth Kelly, and I put a pair of Puma suedes with him. And then I love this picture of Ellsworth Kelly. Kind of just Sean Scully, a pair of Adidas Gazelles. This is Stanley Whitney, and I love his work. He's he's so fun to listen to. He's just a really great guy, nice guy. And then these sneakers are Nike Dunks. And they're actually called Bart Simpsons, which is why you have so much yellow. And then Stanley Whitney. I was thinking about his work today, and something about it, he had this whole epiphany. His career was not going well, and his wife, who's also an artist, she had a Rome Prize grant, and he went with her to Rome, and the experience of being in Rome just kind of changed his whole viewpoint. And I think it's paintings that kind of just smile at you when you walk into them. Agnes Martin, and I put her in these Converse weapons. I remember I went to Taos on a family trip, and I couldn't ski, and that's the whole reason people were in Taos to ski. I was happy because I could go see Agnes Martin's studio, and I could see her gallery. And I was thinking about it. I was like, well, I mean, Taos is kind of a rough place to live during the winter. And so she would be wearing these high tops to get around. Howard Hodgkins, I gave him a pair of New Balance 547s. Robert Ryman, I gave him a pair of K-Swiss. This is Frank Stella, and these are, Adidas Sambas. So another Frank Stella piece that I love. This is Mark Bradford. And so I gave him a pair of Nike Air Max 97s, Sean Witherspoons. And Mark Bradford's work is incredible. This is Pickett's Stance. If you ever go to DC to the Hirshhorn, it was supposed to be there temporarily, but I feel like they loved the piece so much they kind of kept renewing it year after year. And it goes in the full circle of the museum. And I visit it every year when I go to DC and spend time with it. And I was thinking about, that Mark could use this Civil War battlefield in this abstract language to talk about the importance of it and also the negative connotations of it. That the language I was using could also be used to describe a lot of different things. Barnett Newman, a pair of old school Vans, certainly the stripes and all that. Martin Puryear, these are Nike Air Force Ones. Martin Puryear's sculptures, his palettes, usually like they're a black tar, sometimes they're gray stone, but he does a lot of work in natural wood. And so Nike put out this entire series called Wheat, and so I'm kind of connecting it with this piece. This is Arturo Herrera. He's a Venezuelan artist, and this is actually a piece from Prospect One in New Orleans. So this was right after Katrina. I gave him a pair of Nike Cortezes, And the sad thing about this piece is, I can remember it must have been months after PS1, and it was just kind of hanging on the building. And I knew people drove by and they just did not know what they were looking at. And I feel bad that the conservators kind of just let it just go to pieces. He works a lot in collage. I was going to try to show some images of his work, but I encourage you to look at his work. He does this great Art 21 video where he has this entire box of all these materials that he's cutting and making these collages with. Arturo Herrera, he's a Venezuelan, but he lives in Berlin. And then the blue, this blue and yellow painting. And in sneakers, for some reason, I think it has to do just in the 70s, blue and yellow were this prominent colorway. Like they made running shoes in blue and yellow. But anyway, I wanted to throw another Rothko in there, and then also another Vermeer, his love of yellow and blue. And then these are called Stockholms. And if you ever, you watched the Olympics this summer, the pole vaulter from Lafayette, he's Sweden. And I always love, blue and yellow for the Sweden. And then this is Matisse's Red Studio, which has this really great story. The Museum of Modern Art did an entire exhibit just about this one painting and its history in regards to modern art. And so I paired it with, these are called Air Yeezys, and then the official name is called the Red October. And I was trying to think parallels that Kanye got fired from Nike in 1913 when Matisse first showed in the United States. There were art students at the Art Institute of Chicago that burned reproductions of his work, and that there were people that got rejected but now are very much revered. But Kanye a little bit. But at that point, 10 years ago, Kanye was celebrated. And of course, Stephanie Patton. This is just for you. But look at that Reebok Freestyle.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
And that piece there. And I guarantee, you had a pair of these at Turling's.
That's crazy.
So I just threw that in for you if you were
Oh my
thinking about your work.
That's awesome. Oh, that's crazy. Thank you, Michael.
And then this is a piece from a couple of years ago. It was called Transatlantic. This is my piece. And then I'm pretty sure I made the painting, and then I bought the shoes. And I bought the shoes because it looked like the painting. So in short, it's about the design, the colorways, the palettes, and all that is very much feeding my creative practice. And so there's a lot of great benefits that I'm spending so much time looking at the sneaker culture, which is so prevalent for the kids, but it's also very nostalgic for adults my age. All right, so studio processes. Reagan's not here, but I kept talking to her about messy studio images. I often do a lot of works on paper, and I like to sit in my studio in the morning with a cup of coffee, and there's something very primal or very kind of childlike in a way to be able to cut and glue. It's this very simple process. There's often ways I just get caught up and I don't even touch that cup of coffee and an hour will go by. Then again, also I'm thinking, I love these old travel posters and railway posters, especially ones that are advertising France. And so there's this very kind of cubism feel to the landscape. And then I also work big. And so I get around and, I used to think 48 by 48 was big. It's kind of small now. And it looks big in my studio because my studio is really small. But certainly when you get in these environments. I don't work on one by one, one at a time. I make a lot of work all at the same time. Sometimes there's a lot of great benefits to that. And then sometimes you worry that everything starts looking the same or you're using the same palette on everything. But pay close attention to these pieces. They eventually got cannibalized, I use that term, and they ended up being these works. And so at a point I was cutting away all the negative space, and I was very much into an overall shape of things. And then this is a couple of years ago. These are all paintings in process. And so my work it was much more free-flowing. I had much more of a language of those mid-century design shapes. And then at some point I decided to kind of go back and reinvestigate working in a much more linear, stacking fashion. And so this is kind of all the work that's in this exhibit, just about, and just taking one last image before I packed it up to bring here. I work pretty intuitively. I don't do a lot of sketches or planning. A lot of the color palettes just kind of find their way through struggling. Even though sometimes I wish I should contract like an interior designer to just figure out all the color schemes and hand them to me. Sometimes that would be much easier. All right, so the 2024 work. So this is all work that I made over the last year. And then some of these pieces, I'm going to share with you the first 5 pieces that really aren't in the show. They were already kind of out in the world, and I'd already committed them to other exhibits. In January, I kind of came across this poem by Charles Bukowski. I don't know, I'm not a big study of his work, but I do love this poem. And it kind of became this kind of prayer for me for 2024. And I really caught on to this notion here of the gods will offer you chances. And I think one thing people have constantly told me, and people even in this room have told me, like, Michael, you just need to be patient about my career, about opportunities. And I kind of took that with me. And so I've had a really great 2024, and I'm going to have a good 2025 creatively with a lot of showing opportunities lined up. And so I pulled a lot of verses out of this poem here. And actually the video has Tom Waits, I think is the musician, who's reading it. And he kind of closes the book and he says it's a pretty good poem there. But this is a piece called There Is Light Somewhere. And you certainly could see me thinking about Monet's work and Impressionistic sunrise and the use of blue and orange. And then I also last spring I got I want to use the term roped in, but it's part of my job to host and plan a documentary event for the late Bobby Charles, and so I spent a lot of time thinking about Bobby Charles and talking with a lot of musicians. Bobby Charles was a singer-songwriter. He wrote "Walking to New Orleans." Several other great hits for people, and also a musician. He could have lived anywhere. He could have lived in New York. He could have lived in Nashville, but he ended up wanting to live in Abbeville, Louisiana. And so I talked to a lot of musicians that worked with him, and so I was listening a lot to his music. And so this piece is called In a Good Place Now, which is a title of his song, but also is the title of a documentary. So this piece is in honor of Bobby Charles. Then there was 3 other smaller pieces. This is in the alumni show we just closed in Fletcher Hall. And so the piece on the left is called Your Life is Your Life, and so that's from that initial poem. The one in the middle is called Long Runner, and on the right it's called Summer Dialogues. And so they're a little bit smaller, they're 24 by 20. And then I kind of stopped, I think, in the beginning of June, and I decided, and I made these 5 pieces between January and June. And I said, I'm going to stop making work and stop for the summer and enjoy my summer and try to relax a little bit and not feel I have to be in the studio every day. And then I got a call from Ben Hickey, who said, I'd like to offer you a show in this space here. And so it was totally about face, and that was in July, so I really kind of just took 1 month off. And I said, well, he said, well, you have plenty of work. And I was like, well, I kind of want to make new work. Is that all right? And he was fine with that. And so on kind of July 5th, I got after it, and I started making these pieces here. So I'm really going to just kind of talk about three distinct pieces that are my favorites in the exhibit. So this is a piece called Fermoir. And what Fermoir is, it's the German term for the opposite of homesickness. So you don't long for home, you long for somewhere else other than home. And it's also a punk rock band in Germany too, but it has nothing to do with that band. And I just thought it was an appropriate word of where my mind was, that I really was longing to travel and do something else. And so you start to see a lot of the palettes and the imagery from the south of France, from the Mediterranean. I'm thinking about that, but I'm also thinking about all those other things, about sneakers and design and mid-century design. And so these are all kind of small, intimate, 15 by 12. One thing, these I looked at, I always felt like I overworked the hell out of them. There's a lot of labor. And I was trying to be a little bit light-handed in this piece here. It also became like it was the first piece. Okay, I'm done. And Misty, Reagan, here's the piece. Like, here's one piece to start promoting. And then a week later, I said, can we not publish that? I want to work on it a little more. And then this is called Kisses from the Riviera, and it's kind of self-explanatory of thinking about the Riviera, thinking about modern art history, Matisse, the sun, the light, the blue water, striations. And then the title, I love James Bond films. I love the titles of them, especially the early ones. I don't really care that much for the later ones. And so that's where the title really came from. And then this is an image, if you've ever been to Nice, it's kind of the dream of what you think the Mediterranean is, and it's not Disney World. This is old world, old town Nice. And I remember one day I was on the public transit. It's a train that it's kind of a futuristic train because it runs on these magnetic tracks. And I remember I passed a street that was just as colorful, and it had lines of clothing like tablecloths and shirts, and I wanted to jump out at the next stop to photograph it, to walk back. And when we stopped, the French police raided the train to check that you bought tickets, because it's kind of not free, but they check. And so if you get busted and you haven't paid your fare, they give you a $50 ticket, or it might be $150. And so I did have an all-day pass, but I jumped off, and I remember I was freaked out with all these French police grabbing everybody. And then I walked back, and I never found the street. And so I came across this photograph that really kind of encompassed what I was thinking about. And then the last piece I'm going to talk about is this piece called Amity Island Soiree. Can anybody tell me where Amity Island is? Anybody? All right, Amity Island. Yeah, so it's from the movie Jaws. It's fictitious. It's not real. They made up the town. So I'm a lover of Jaws. I joke I like to watch it at the beach. I do, but so sometimes in my studio I put on movies, and artists do this. They watch movies while they paint, or especially the students here, or they listen to something. And I was watching Jaws, and I've seen it a million times. And it's a movie that kind of holds together the acting. I think it's one of the early Steven Spielberg movies, and I still think it's great. And the last thing I did on this painting is I added this orange striping here to kind of pull things together. And I'm thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, it works. And I looked at the screen of Jaws, and this is the beach area, and I'm sure it was a set, and they filmed tons of scenes from the movie. And there's in the background, there's these huts with these striped orange things. And so I was like, yeah, I need to connect it with Jaws in some way. And I love this scene, and I'm blanking on. Can anybody help me? What's the name of the police officer? Sergeant Brody. Chief Brody. And the beauty about Chief Brody, he's like this ultimate protagonist, hero. He's an outsider. You're not from the island. They tell him you don't like to swim, you don't like boats. And this is a real crucial scene where like they zoom in on him and the panic comes across his face. But I love the film, and it just shows you that certain things influence you, sometimes on purpose and sometimes just by chance. So I'm going to end on that. And if you're really interested and you want to look, I have this is my website, and I have at least to 2019 on there. I have also a lot of exhibition images of previous exhibitions. And thank you for coming out, and I'm more than happy to take any questions you may have. Yeah, Jan. Yeah.
What kind of glue do you use for your collage piece? And after you finish gluing all the pieces, do you do some varnishing?
Yep. So here's the trick, and Linda, I bet could add to this too, because she's a collage expert. For me, it's about what I want to do after I collage it down. So if I'll do something kind of semi-gloss if I'm done, and especially a final varnish. But if a lot of times I want to draw or paint on top of what I've collaged, and so I always use something with a matte finish. So there's a tooth for the pencil to grab onto, or the marker. I use Mod Podge, which comes in different layers. I use the really high-end glue that's archival too. I use acrylic. I use a lot of different glues, and it depends what I'm gluing down. Also, the paper quality. Like sometimes the thicker the paper, the tougher it is for it to glue down. So I find it has to be thin enough paper so it melts into and adheres. Cardstock drives me crazy because it doesn't want to glue down. Also, like the beauty of it, it's a sustainability kind of art form that, like, I could go through life the rest of my life and just buy one thing of glue, and the world is full of paper. And you're not destroying the planet, you're actually helping it. And for a while I thought about that. Maybe that's my shtick, that I just hoard paper all day long and I never have to buy paint. But I also like to paint too. And so I like that relationship. I also use a lot of painter's tape. I didn't mention that too, and that's part of my process. And I kind of become like a printmaker, that I'll put bands of painter's tape down early on, and I paint in between. How you seal the painter's tape, how do you get crisp edges, that's all a science for me. I have my own methods, even though it says like edge lock paint, that's bullshit. And a lot of it has to do with the surface you paint on. Going back, let's see. So all this work is done on canvases. I started these pieces on paper, and I would bend the paper, and I liked all the folds, and I liked them as paper. And then I said, well, how about I mount it to wood? And that's what I ended up doing. I mounted it to wood. And when you do a collage and you want hard edges, if you have like a birch panel or a hard, the painting, it won't flex like canvas, and so you're able to get really crisp lines. Also like to use sanders, orbital sanders, hand sanders, and sometimes when things aren't going right, you just put a power sander to it, and a whole new world opens up to you. But then there's drawbacks. Panel and wood are heavier when you need to ship it somewhere, and so you're spending a lot. And then canvases and pre-made canvases are much more affordable. So yeah, there's a lot of technical things in my work. All righty. Well, thank y'all for coming out.
Michael, thank you so much. This, for me, as the educator here at the Hilliard, has been a joy to teach both little children and older adults and older children. They do find so much joy in the work, and that's been basically the response that we've gotten from every group that's come in is, it's so happy, it's so fun. So thank you so much for sharing your time with us. Thank you for sharing your artwork with us, and we look forward to having you back at the Hilliard for our next creative conversation. Thank you.